Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCA's 51st monthly Zoom presentation. We're now into our second half century, so to speak, of monthly SCA Zoom presentations with no end in sight. My name is Brian Gallagher. I'm the president of the Society for Commercial Archaeology, and I'm proud to be your host tonight. Welcome to all our guests and any new people we have had with us tonight. We're happy you took the time out of your summer evening to watch an SCA presentation. I hope you enjoy the show. And for anybody watching the recording of this episode of the SCA's monthly presentations who's not a member of the SCA, we earnestly ask you to consider joining. Funding for the various activities of the SCA comes almost exclusively from our membership. Just visit our website at www.sca-roadside.org and follow the links. Now I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's presentation. Marshall Shore and Kris J. Kraus will present Voices of an Era, the Legacy of Drag Recordings. Marshall and Kris will explore the stories and locations beyond the recordings. From RuPaul to Ray Bourbon, drag recorded music reflects the evolution of drag culture from underground clubs to mainstream media. Artists have used their music to express identity, entertain, and challenge societal norms. From vaudeville to digital platforms, the history of drag music is a testament to the resilience and creativity of drag performers. Marshall Shore, also known as the Hip Historian, specializes in finding and sharing the most interesting bits and curiosities from our past. And Kris J. Kraus, label owner, collector, philanthropist, and attorney, to learn why many of these albums not only offer context for time periods, but also document the performance venues from a time when archival records are non-existent, much like some of the architecture. So Marshall and Kris, I'd like to invite you to unmute yourself and come on and share your screen and let's see the presentation.
Thank you, Brian. And welcome everybody. Marshall?
Let's see.
There you go.
There we go. All right, hold on just a moment.
Okay.
Excited to see you all here. Oh my gosh, we're getting ready to have a great time as we say thank you to you all for joining us on wherever you are, whether it's a hot, balmy night out or I think it's balmy everywhere right now. So there you go. So Kris and I am, let's see, I'm the project manager for the Arizona LGBT plus history project. I also do a lot of just Arizona fun history. I'm going to be up in October in Kingman for their Route 66 festival as the MC. So all kinds of fun things going on there with mainly Arizona history. Kris, do you want to say anything about yourself before we launch into?
Well, you know, that's my dog, Luca, if you're wondering, and a box of records behind me. So on one of our trips, I run a pop-up at Tiki and Mid-Century Modern events called Luca's Snakebite Lounge. I also have a record label called Black Fez Records, and me and a fella named Skip Heller, who I think is joining us today, are going to start a Exotica Journal, a scholarly periodical that is going to talk about exotica music. And this is one of the topics that we had been researching, and I'm good friends with Marshall. We've presented on topics before at events. About a year ago, I was at an event and I was sitting there. Marshall came up and I said, Marshall, you know, I've been finding these drag queen records. And he kind of looked at me and I said, yeah, man, there's all these records from the 50s and 60s of drag queens at these defunct bars and clubs, and you know, I'm doing some research on them. Do you want to be part of it? And here we are today.
Indeed. I mean, I immediately shot back a few names and he was like, oh, you actually know some of these people. All right. And so we're going to start off just by mentioning Ray Bourbon, whose name will come up quite frequently, was probably the most famous of those drag queen record doers. I think Kris is going to hold up a few right there that he's been collecting and finding in all kinds of nooks and crannies across the country. He was recording.
Just so you know, we actually have the records. We're not keyboard warriors and internet researchers. I've been
some of us
searching
are.
these things out.
That's why we're tag teaming together. So, and then, and so I do want to say that a lot of these performers that we're talking about, we are just literally giving you the very gloss, surface level introduction to them. Many of them could be our books on their own. And so just throwing that out there, we're not going to cover anyone in extreme depth, but you know, this also came about because I've been attending different meetings with the New York City LGBT Historic Site Project, the GLBT Historical Society out of San Francisco, and really starting to look at how gay spaces or LGBTQ spaces are preserved. Many of them don't even exist. And so really using this to kind of highlight that, to create an awareness, to create just a knowledge base of that. I also do want to say that I couldn't have done this without all the work of JD Doyle and the Queer Music Heritage Site. A plethora of knowledge on so many different things. So if you get a chance, take a look at it. Now, you know, not long ago when people talked about drag racing, they thought about cars going really fast. And then came RuPaul, who has a lot of singles, records, movies, all kinds of things. And when you start looking back at that history, probably the next big drag queen to really do much would be Divine. So Divine did a lot of disco music. And when she would perform, it was people, I mean, there's actually a friend who's like, I still have my ticket from 1988 when she performed here at the Gay Rodeo. And so this was a monumental thing in people's daily lives to have someone like this coming to their town. It was a huge deal. And then you've got Christine Jorgensen, who so many people think was the first the first trans person to a record. That might be the case. We don't really know, but was definitely the most famous trans person out there. Yes.
She was a nightclub performer.
True.
I'm not sure there's any documentation of that, but on the record, it's basically an interview with, I'm not sure if it's a real news reporter or a fake news reporter. A lot of the questions are cringeworthy in today's more accepting generation. But she does talk about how she had an operation, hormone therapy, things like that. But her nightclub act, where she talks about singing, a variety of costume changes, dancing, jokes, very similar to Rusty Warren and people we may talk about a little bit later, actual female performers.
And then also when we talk about trans performers, there is the famous Billy Tipton.
And there was a movie made about Billy Tipton, a documentary that came out recently in the last few years, No Ordinary Man. And that provides a lot more information on Billy, who was born a female and then assumed the gender of a male in order to have a successful jazz career.
And kept that secret until his death. I mean, and played all over the country. I mean, here's just a list of some of the places that he was performing.
And got married, had adopted children from his wives. Nobody knew until his death. Also, if you watch the movie, there's a story about one of the famous DJs in one of the towns he performed in, who was also transgender, and only they knew it. The listeners didn't know that the DJ was actually a biological female.
Wow. And then you have things like the Pearl Box Review. Now, this was a traveling troupe that over 20 years performed in a lot of places, and ergo a lot of LGBT documentation. There are some listings, but for 20 years of them traveling the country, there should have been a lot more documentation.
An interesting thing about this is up on the top right, you see Mr. Dorian Corey. Dorian Corey is most famous from the Vogue scene in New York. And there's a documentary that was put out in the early 90s, I believe, called Paris is Burning. And she's one of the featured interviews. And it turned out when Dorian died, they found a petrified carcass, mummy, in her closet that they believe had been there for decades. So we don't know if it was a lover or who it was, but or how they died. But somehow Dorian ended up with this mummified carcass in her closet in New York, in a project building that nobody knew about for decades.
Indeed. Before there were recordings, you actually had drag queens offering sheet music with their name and sometimes likeness on it. And then the advent of recording came out, and you had folks like T.C. Jones, who had not only their own sheet music, but also performing at places like the Crescendo. And everyone knew who T.C. was.
Performing in the same places as Mort Saul and Dave Brubeck. Huge names that had record deals of their own, were on, Mort Saul was in movies, on television pretty consistently back in the day. And obviously everybody knows who Dave Brubeck is. Take Five, one of the most influential jazz musicians in history. So if T.C. Jones was playing there, they had to be a headlining act.
And indeed, she was. In fact, she actually appeared on Broadway and did a recording of that at what is now the Golden Theater. He was did this performance for a month in the about 1957. And that was Mask and Gowns. Now you're seeing this on stage at the same time where this is just in Arizona. It is not singled out. This is happening across the country. If you were caught on the street dressed in women's attire, you could be thrown in jail or kicked out of town. It was also written that you were not supposed to be going and performing and being in bars. You were right up there with gangsters, racketeers, swindlers, and pickpockets. And so there's that duality of here you are on the floor, but on stage it's okay. Out on the street was unacceptable. And we start looking at how do you find places. There are a variety of guides, but they're very subjective or even selective and not a comprehensive guide, especially in the early days. And I discovered Ray Bourbon, who did this album, A Trick Ain't Always a Treat. And on the back of that album, it has 2 rows of places he just performed in. And it was an amazing list highlighting for Arizona, places in Tucson as well, Phoenix. And our first lesbian bar was Kay's Happy Landing, that actually had 2 homes in Phoenix, but originally opened up 1941. And so was wondering, how did Kay's Happy Landing wind up here? Because Kay had been one of his musicians back in LA. And so quite famous for that. Now, the other place that's listed there is Roy's. And really, this came into play because we were trying to save a building that was called the 307, but it was originally called Roy's. And so I didn't know where Roy's was. Come to find out, Roy's was a place that actually Ray performed quite a bit at. And so we really don't know which Roy's it was talking about because there is no year listed. But it was interesting going through. And the last place he performed was at Roy's Steakhouse, which also is now the Knock-Kneed Lobster here in Phoenix. It was also home to Guys and Dolls that had Lee Leonard. And Lee Leonard, I mean, Kris was actually sitting pretty much next to me when I discovered Lee Leonard, who I thought was a local act. And we'll get into that whole Liz Lyons. But he performed all over the valley here in Arizona. And so I assumed he was a local performer. I mean, here he is at Lazar's, which was a historic music venue that the building still stands, but looks nothing like what it did. And so he was a local performer. And then through Queer Music Heritage, when I was sitting next to Kris, I discovered he was from all over the country. And I was like, he was a really busy guy. But one thing stuck out. It's like, you know, that small town down the street from you that you don't really know much about was the Pioneer Bar in Miami, Arizona. And so when tracking that down, I discovered that Lee Leonard had lived in a hotel here in Phoenix. Sadly, it was torn down. A beautiful 1920s building, as you can see there. And during this time period, he did indeed perform in Miami, Arizona, a little mining town. And so on the left-hand side, you can see what that building looked like in 1915 in a colorized photo. And there's what the building looks like today. So the building is still standing. And so I was trying to figure out where Lee Leonard was buried because I thought he was local. He wasn't local. He traveled all over the place performing. And so I started doing some digging. I found out through his basically draft card that he had another name, Lee Nendel. And then I found that the ownership, basically the owner of that liquor license of this building became him. So here you have a drag queen owning a bar in Miami, a rough and tumble mining town in the heart of Arizona. So I know there's more to that story. I basically just discovered this. So there's definitely more on that. But now we get to his recording. And this is when in 1968, he did a gender reassignment in Minnesota and became Liz Lyons. And he recorded 2 albums. I know I saw you hold up the...
And this one is actually signed, so I'm assuming it was sold at a performance like a lot of these records were. And it says, "To Jeff, enjoy me, Liz Lyons." And a lot of these records were sold at shows, a lot of them at what you would call maybe dirty bookstores, a lot of them at clubs, through organizations. They came in paper bags. They were under the counter. And, you know, you had to be in the know. You weren't walking in the Tower Records or whatever the local record store is. They weren't next to Elvis and the Beatles.
And the Morocco Club, where she recorded both these albums, was an iconic music venue that sadly long ago not burnt down to the ground. I mean, basically burnt and was not salvageable. So there were lots of folks mourning the loss of this building. And it is really sad. But I'm excited that we have Liz Lyons performing there. And then we talked the Twin Cities. Lee Leonard performed. What I thought was interesting was, as Liz Lyons, he found he could make more money as Lee Leonard. So he actually performed sometimes even after he had been reassigned in places like the Gay 90s in the Twin Cities. He was performing. But when you look at this, and this is where I thought it got interesting as well, and Kris and I have talked about this, is it was recorded at the world famous Jewel Box. And I was able to track down a card, and indeed it was Kansas City, Missouri. And so there's what the strip looked like. It was kind of known as a entertainment mecca. There were several little bars in the area. There was the Apollo Theater, which you can see in that photo right there. Looks nothing like that now. And then there's what the Jewel Box Lounge looked like. As what they would have done to record his album, literally just plug into the sound system and record. So it wasn't high tech, but it was definitely a recording of his voice, singing, telling jokes. He was notorious for little body stories, things that you wouldn't hear on the radio, but you could go hear in a live performance, and buy umpteen of his records. A lot of them self-produced.
And did he die in prison?
Oh yeah, we're going to get to that. And so he's one of the folks that there easily is a movie, a book. There's a lot more in that. So yeah,
I'll save that.
so he had quite an interesting history. But we do have, I mean, that's why it was so phenomenal to find that one record that has cities across the country where he was performing in that may show up in some of the books, may not show up in some of the guidebooks that people were using. And this was highlighted through the Kansas City Rainbow Tour. They include this with them. Now, also at the Jewel Box was Skip Arnold, who was another performer. And I knew he had a record out, and I assumed it was done at the Jewel Box, but he wound up moving to Chicago and recording it at the Annex, which at first, it's like Kris and I were talking, and I thought, Welcome to Fairyland sounds like maybe a fictitious label. I don't know about that, but I did find out the Annex indeed still stands in Chicago. And then we get to Jackie Shane.
From Toronto.
Yeah. Who was, I mean, again, one of these other performers that most people didn't know about until recently. I mean, there's a documentary. They've re-released some of the albums of Jackie.
Yeah, the New Marrow group put out I don't want to call it a box set, but a multi-disc reissue of her products, of her singles, and there was a lot of recordings, and I believe the most popular one was called Any Other Way, and it's kind of like a late 60s pop, sort of Amy Winehouse sort of thing, the sort of music that Amy Winehouse was copying.
And basically Jackie was touted as coming up and being a significant contributor to just creating that Toronto sound, and was famous for recording at the Sapphire Tavern. And that building does still stand. Queen for a Day. I was just watching a documentary, and this actually album popped up as they were talking about Ty Bennett. Again, traveled the country all over the place. And this was recorded in Club 82 in New York City. And through the New York City LGBT Historic Sites Project, it's documented that this club, this building still exists, and was run at that point by Anne Giovese, who you might know is a crime family name. So there also, many of these establishments had mafia connections.
Well, didn't the Stonewall have some sort of mafia connection as well?
So, I mean, it's like a lot of bars did. You also had even the Jewel Box. The manager in the 60s was said to have been very mafia heavy. But it's like you had such celebrities coming here as Liberace, Tennessee Williams, Burt Lancaster. Pretty much this place was a really big deal. And then when we were plugging around, I was so excited to find this album.
Yeah, I don't have a copy of this. It's very hard to find.
It's extremely rare. I mean, it's like I was happy to even find a photo of it. But what I do love is you can go online and it has been uploaded to the internet. So Jose is famous because he was, in the early 60s, the very first out gay running for public office. He ran for San Francisco Board of Supervisors. Now, he didn't win, but he garnered enough votes to make the LGBT community kind of a powerhouse. And
this was before Harvey Milk, right?
Yeah, so this would have been 1961. So this was pre-Stonewall, pre-Harvey Milk. So he really was the first one. He also was the founder of the Imperial Court. So, and he was known as the Grand Mirror, the Absolute Empress, one to San Francisco, as well as the Widow Norton.
Do you want to explain what the Imperial Court is? People don't know.
The Imperial Court is basically a philanthropic group of folks that get together and dress in the opposite sex and raise money, and then a civic organization, and then hold various events and give money back to the community. So it's very community driven. And so the Black Cat was famous because it opened up, closed for Prohibition, and then opened up right after Prohibition in the early 30s, and had about a 3-decade run of becoming the hangout for all the beats, the bohemians, and then attracting the gay clients coming in. This has a plaque. This is I think this is the only building we've talked about that actually is denoted by a plaque. Everything else you've got to know about, or you'll just walk by it and not even know where you are. But I love the fact you can go on and you can hear Jose's voice.
And that's in San Francisco, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So here he is. And so they actually found this, a photo of him inside the club. And then Lee Sutton, who
I
was
was actually listening to this today. Lee is English, or from over there, Scottish English, and it's drag queen with a foreign accent.
So how was the music?
It's the same sort of thing. It's a lot of double entendres, a lot of Broadway-esque things, you know, uh, you know, uh, jokes that are corny now, but were probably cutting edge then. Do you want a parrot? No, I want a cock or two. Things like that. You know,
Very nice. And you'll
and
notice the
the
label on
audience.
this.
I'm sorry, the audience appears to be mixed gendered. And I think a lot of these performers performed before men and women, husbands and wives, people that were out for a night on the town. I don't believe it was exclusively for gay men or lesbians. I think these were lounge performers who were on the level of a Lenny Bruce or a Mort Saul or a Rusty Warren, who attracted multi gendered audiences, husband and wives, people on dates, things of that nature.
Right. And so that's why we can go back and track where they're performing through newspaper ads, because they could perform. But if they were doing this on the street, they could easily be arrested. So that's always, whenever I see this, always in the back of my mind that it was this double-edged sword. And so you'll notice, so this album is by Jubilee. Jubilee was also the record label that Rusty Warren recorded a lot of albums on. Now, you might not know who Rusty is, but if you've got all these albums, what do folks that didn't record them do? There was a group called the Phono Fools out of Michigan. And so they pantomimed Annex to...
Marshall, I have a bunch of Rusty Warren records here, and they say Jubilee
Yeah.
right on the bottom of pretty much every one of them.
Right. Yeah, she was a big Jubilee. And so Rusty actually walked into the club in Michigan that they were performing in and said, "Oh, I really like what you're doing." In fact, so here's some of Rusty's records that they were pantomiming to, or now we'd call it lip syncing, to the point where she sent them a telegram and wished them well because she had gotten them a gig here in Scottsdale, right here in Arizona, performing at a little bar, actually the hotel bar called the Interlude. Now, they did perform several times, and then they came back to perform another time, and the basically doors were locked. The manager had left town in the middle of the night. So we don't really know the story there yet.
Marshall.
Yes.
Back in the early 90s, there was a bunch of books put out by Research Vale in San Francisco. Two of them were called Incredibly Strange Music 1 and 2. And number 2 has a interview with Rusty Warren in it, where she says, "I knew T.C. Jones. We met on Sunset Boulevard when I worked upstairs at the Crescendo. if you remember, we showed the T.C. Jones record live at the Crescendo, the same place as Dave Brubeck. He was still alive then, but was very heavily into drugs. He was talented. He was brilliant. So there was a lot of intersection between the comedians who portrayed their true genders and these drag queens who were either transformed or projecting other genders.
Right. And in many cases, these bars were one of the few places where those the LGBT community could go and find each other. I mean, we actually did interviews with some folks, and it was funny because they each said there are only 3 bars in town in like the 50s, but they each knew 3 different bars here, and that's just as Arizona. So trying to find these places is always kind of an uphill battle. And so this is what the interlude looks like today. It's someone's house. And so, as we said, a lot of these places have a history and so many of these performers. So when we talk about Ray Bourbon, if you ever make your way to Texas, and if you're anywhere near the Brown County Jail in Brownwood, Texas, you can stop at Steve's Market and Deli, which 2 guys took over this deli and turned it into a tribute to the prison where he spent his final years, including
the story is that he had a trailer or multiple trailers that he used to travel around the country with, and that he stored them at this town in Texas, and he had a large amount of dogs.
Yeah, it was like 70 dogs.
An excessive amount of dogs. And that he had went on tour or something, and trusted the caretaker of the property to take care of his dogs. The dogs died, and then Ray killed the owner of the land.
Actually, convinced his neighbor to go to Texas.
Okay, he hired a hitman.
Yeah, so he didn't do it himself, and so he pled innocent, that he knew nothing about it, but
he was eventually convicted and died in prison.
Yes, and so to that, this little deli has taken it upon themselves to keep Ray Bourbon's story alive, which I think is really great. And so, as I said, this could not be done without the help of J.D. Doyle and that Queer Music Heritage site. What a plethora of information, as well as places that are now starting to really change the paradigm of historic preservation in terms of, for so many marginalized communities, those buildings are either no longer looking like they were originally, which is important for historic preservation. So it's now switching not necessarily to a physical building, but more to what the story is for those buildings that aren't still there.
Marshall, while we were waiting to come on, I was looking at some of the other books I have, and I accumulate a lot of stuff. I don't always get to it. And I was reading about Lipsinka, John Epperson, who was one of the big drag queens before RuPaul. I would say in the 70s and 80s.
And 90s. Actually, I saw him here in Scottsdale just before, I think, pre-COVID.
And Lipsinka comes from Jackson, Mississippi. And he was saying how there was one gay bar in town called May's Cabaret. But then later, when they got to New York, they were performing at a place called Club 57 on St. Mark's Place, which the building is still there. It's 57 St. Mark's, but the club isn't there, as well as the Pyramid Club in the East Village, which that building is still there, but the club isn't there either. And the Pyramid Club, if I'm not mistaken, that's where a lot of the post-punk bands and things like that went down as well. As in addition to these drag shows where they'd probably give Lipsinka a Sunday night or something like that to come in and do their thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember going there and seeing a play out, maybe like a rock musical of Alice in Wonderland, that was just over the top. So but I'm glad that these type of recordings are still around so that we can find some of that history, because some of these places are, I mean, it was like we actually were, I was trying to use the Ray Bourbon album to actually try to save the 307 here in town. And so I really would encourage, if there's anyone else of the interested in those locations, looking at the back of that album just to see where Ray performed. I mean, from what we know, that album came out probably about mid 60s. So everything is listed there is pre-Stonewall, which I think is pretty amazing.
And Marshall, there's not necessarily a building tied to this story, but there is a record out there called Love is a Drag. And this is actually an original copy of it. It was reissued a few years ago by Modern Harmonics, and I have the reissue as well. But recently I tracked down an original copy.
Wow.
And these are usually when somebody sings a love song, it's to the opposite gender. So if Frank Sinatra's singing The Lady's a Tramp, but if Ella Fitzgerald wants to do it, the guy is something. You know, she's not singing The Lady is a Tramp.
Right.
They reverse the genders. On Love is a Drag, there was a male singer, an unknown male singer. It was eventually learned it was a guy named Gene Howard, who was straight, but his vocal cords were damaged and he couldn't sing professionally anymore. So they got him to do this studio record where he kept, they did the opposite of the gender thing, where he sang love songs for men. And this was for the gay community so that they could hear the love songs, a guy singing to other men, not to women. And it was one of those things that was sold under the counter. It was sold on the strip, you know, at bookstores or whatever. And it became a cult thing until it was rediscovered and put out by Modern Harmonics. But just a couple weeks ago on Melrose, across the street from Fairfax High School, home of Herb Alpert and all those other famous musicians, I found a copy of this in the back room of a record store. I was allowed to go into the back room and I found an original copy of it.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is a sort of a rabbit hole that takes a lot of you know, it shoots off in different directions. It's not just men dressing as women. Sometimes there was drag kings.
Right.
And, you know, we're looking for records from those performers as well. Women pretending to be men or assuming the gender of men.
Right. And so this just scratches the surface, but I thought it was, I mean, it's like when Kris was like, hey, let's do a program. And I was like, well, how do we take the angle on this? And then SCA reached out and said, hey, you want to do a program? And I'm like, I do, but I could do signage, but let's talk about something really different and let's see what that looks like. And so I am so excited that we were able to do this.
Here's another one, Marshall. It's called The Queen is in the Closet. This
Yeah.
was put out by the Mart on Santa Monica Boulevard. I guess that was a store at 8865 Santa Monica Boulevard.
I mean, there's so many rabbit holes with this. I mean, only because of this program did I go back and find that Lee Leonard had owned a bar in Miami, Arizona. So, Brian, do we have any questions?
Yes, we do. Well, so I just was waiting for you to take a little pause there so I could jump in. And oh my goodness, Marshall, and Kris, what a fascinating presentation, and liberally illustrated with both the performers and also the venues, which is fascinating. And I mean, I was doubly fascinated because I live in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And so you had a slide there of what's known as the Confederation Life Building. That's the building that the Sapphire Tavern was in. Now your picture is from 1967. I was I was a tween at that time, just becoming a teenager, and I have no recollection of the Sapphire Tavern. but that building definitely is still there and thriving. So that was a little hometown touch that I really enjoyed. But it was so interesting to see all the buildings and the fact that in many cases the buildings are still there, but the clubs and the businesses are long gone. It just shows how ephemeral this whole field of SCA and also a lot of the queer stuff that you were talking about. It's just here today, gone tomorrow. You really have to appreciate it and do our best to try and preserve or celebrate it at least.
You
Now
know,
we do.
Ryan, I think, this is only probably the tip of the iceberg. I think a lot of these clubs didn't really exist in a traditional sense. Like, let's go to the Roxy or let's go to the Whiskey. It was probably a moving portable thing that maybe it was at somebody's house. Maybe they rented, the Union Hall for an event or something like that. I kind of think it was similar to, like, 1980s punk rock, where, you're running out a Universalist church or the Elk Lodge, or people were having shows in people's basement. This was an underground culture. And the people we're talking about are just the ones that were, quote unquote, the stars,
Right.
that were accepted. There has to be people, on the lower scale that we're trying to discover and find out if, maybe there's home recordings, maybe there's evidence about that. And, Marshall and I, and with the assistance of a fellow named Skip, who I think may be on the chat, we're going to try to track down as many of recordings as this as possible and hopefully put together some sort of compilation or something like that, so that this music, this comedy is not lost in the ether of time. And, I give all credit to Marshall for making this happen, but the genesis was just me out there buying weird records at the swap meet and thrift stores, and then, stumbling upon this, and then going to places and saying, do you have any drag records? And then pulling out records from the 50s or 60s about drag racing. And I'm like, no, they're comedy records. And then they would send me to where, like, Flip Wilson was, or Red Fox, or something like that, where there was a big thing in the Black comedy community where comedians would dress up as women. And I'm like, no, it's and eventually I kind of, I'd find some here and there, and they're not cheap. They're not cheap records, because there's not very many of them.
Yeah.
They're they're not like, Marshall mentioned Rusty Warren. In California, I can't walk down the street without seeing a Rusty Warren record, or one that's signed. Now, people in New York or wherever might not even know who Rusty Warren is. So I think it's also geographically based as well. I'm a New Yorker. I live in Southern California. Both have large gay populations, so I think I'm able to find them a little bit easier than people in Middle America may.
Yeah. And I sympathize, Kris, with your problem of going into record stores or antique stores or whatever and trying to explain what it is you're looking for, because we have exactly the same problem with our organization, which is called the Society for Commercial Archaeology. And you tell people that, they say, well, what the hell is that? What does that mean? Are you archaeologists just digging up holes and looking for pot shards? And I mean, it's not a very descriptive name. So that's why we put on our website sca-roadside.org, because it really is about the roadside. And you covered a lot of that. And in fact, we do have some questions. I'm going to get to them in a minute, but it's starting a bit of a theme here, because we have a journal which is published twice a year, and there's a fellow in there who does a column on Canadian SCA type issues, motels, all sorts of interesting things that are in Canada. And his next article in the issue coming up in the fall is about music venues along Yonge Street in Toronto, which is the main street, the main entertainment street, and that were frequented by a guy named Ronnie Hawkins, who was a member of the band. and most people have heard of the band. And but he got his start or he got his musical start in Toronto. He's an American, and so there he's going to showcase all those different venues and how they built up his career. So you've started a little bit of a trend here, Kris. But let's get to the questions because we have a few. The first one is, Scooter. Now that's the fellow you're referring to, I guess. He's Scooter Mariner. He makes the comment the Black Cat didn't really close during Prohibition, so maybe that's news to you.
So not shocked at all by that.
Yeah, Scooter, are you still around? Did you want to, let's see if he's still on the list? Did you want to say anything, Scooter? I've unmuted you if you want to unmute yourself.
Oh. Hey there, this is Scooter.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, a lot of bars in San Francisco transformed themselves into cafes or restaurants or other things, and they were officially no longer bars. And I'm slowly putting together some information about that, not specifically for the queer bars, but just for all the bars in San Francisco. But a lot of them had, I mean, the queer bars were already used to doing a sort of speakeasy kind of operation. So for them to change to something else where they were pouring the gin into teacups and calling it a cup of tea was nothing new for them.
Okay, that's fascinating. Interesting.
Thank you, Scooter.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Like I said, they were obviously used to skirting the law. They were obviously used to operating in the shadows, whatever terminology you want to use.
Yeah. Now, Jeremy Ebersol, I'll unmute you here too, Jeremy, if you would like to jump on, but I'll read his comment. He says, I know the building used by Darcel XV, I guess that's 15, in Portland, Oregon, was added to the National Register in 2020. Do you know of any other buildings with historic designation based on their association with a drag performer?
There's not that many bars. I know Stonewall is a national monument now. Bar 1 in Hollywood has been designated historic, but this is kind of a fairly new trend. I mean, it's like in terms of historic designation for LGBTQ buildings to get that. And so sometimes that history might not meet the rigorous definition of what historic means for basically state historic preservation offices. But this kind of looking at the story is starting to really change that. And so, because the building has to be around for 50 years, well, some of these bars we don't have documented that they were around for 50 years, but the stories that we get are more oral history. You really don't start getting basically LGBTQ press until after Stonewall in most locations.
Okay, interesting. Actually, that's a good lead into the next question, Marshall. And so Paul Sherman asked the question. He has two questions. His first question is, in what sort of publications did those ads that you were showing, what sort of publications would they run, and would small town newspapers run them? And then the second question, which is probably a little deeper, is how was the term female impersonator used to make these acts seem safer to mainstream audiences than other terms that suggested that these artists' work was challenging gender norms more deeply? So the first one was just what sort of publications run these ads, and the second one about this.
Yeah, no, I mean, so the ads that I found, they were in mainstream, like the Arizona Republic, because they were considered entertainment for a general audience. So a husband and wife could go there. If you're out of town, you wanted to take some friends on an adventure, you could go to this place. Finocchio's in San Francisco is famous for that. And so there were clubs that did that across the country. And so, because again, there were very limited runs or even magazines that you could run something in. Again, locally, there wouldn't have been anything here in Arizona until the mid 70s. I mean, it's like you've got one out of LA, So there were very few LGBTQ magazines or periodicals that you could have put an ad in.
Right. Okay.
And
So
as far as the second part, I think a
Yeah.
lot of it was billed as female impersonators. I think a lot of it was. Ray Bourbon was a man and didn't pretend to be a woman, as far as I know. The Pearl Box Review, those were drag queens, female impersonators. It was like you were going to see, Diana Ross now or Barbara Streisand, things of that nature.
Right. So initially, a lot of them were just mimics. And so they were mimicking. I
Yeah.
mean, TC, that's what he did. I mean, when he was on stage, he was donning dress and sounding like so many other celebrities.
And Rusty Warren refers to TC as he. So there's, it's not the transgender adopting female personas like your Billy Tiptons or some of the other ones who actually lived as females. Christine Jorgensen, who had the surgery, and I believe you said Lee Leonard also had gender reassignment surgery, and
Right.
Liz Lyons.
When I was just watching a documentary last night about some guys out of like Fire Island in New York, and they were female impersonators, and they would get very pissed if someone called them a drag queen because they felt that theirs was a higher art form. That they were.
I see Scooter says that Soma now has a designated leather district, and interesting enough, I used to live over there, and my first time walking Luca in the middle of the night, seeing all the Toms of Finland guys. Is it Toms of Finland? The leather outfits, the Kalita hats and all that. I was wondering what was going on, and then I followed one of the guys, and I saw that they were, all congregating on a Tuesday night or whatever it was at a few of these bars.
Well, and like Eric from Tiki Oasis has been working with folks to actually put together a tour of the Leather District of the historic sites, as well as at Tiki Oasis, this past one in San Diego, he tracked it down to the Tonga Room at the Fairmont, was actually a Hollywood designer using a fake name who was gay.
And the Tonga Room is the one that has the boat in the middle of the dining area. It actually has a mini lake, pond, whatever you want to call it.
Because originally it was a swimming pool. That was what that whole space was. And so this pool started making money, so they converted it into a bar, and over time it developed this whole tiki theme.
Wow, that's crazy. I'm going to wrap it up here, Marshall and Kris, because we're approaching 9 and some of our people are dropping off. But there's one question here, which, and there's a bunch more comments and so on, which you'll see when I send. Well, you're already looking at them, but I'll send you the chat too. But Brad Holcomb asks, can we hear some audio of the performers? Now, we can't do that on this show, but where could they hear these audio of these performers?
Ray Bourbon is on Spotify.
Marshall and I are working on some project, where it takes us, whether, I want to do a compilation, whether it becomes a mini documentary, a web series. I'm not sure where it will be, but we'll be eventually putting some of this audio online. We have to clear samples probably, find out if, the people who own this stuff are still around. I am an attorney. I'm always conscious of that stuff, but I think if you Google these folks, there's probably some on YouTube. There's probably some in various places. I do have one request of our audience. If you have any information for us, or you have anybody you think we should check out, please message Marshall and myself or one of us. We're always looking for further information because like Marshall said, we were having dinner about 2-3 weeks ago on a Wednesday evening, just randomly, and he got an alert on his phone, and that led into the whole Lee Leonard thing. And I was just sitting there eating a hamburger, and next thing I know, Marshall's like, oh my God, look at this. So anybody who has any information that'd like to share with us, and if anything comes of it, obviously we'll credit you and cite you for your help. And Brian, thanks for having us. It's been
Yeah,
fun.
thank you all so much. I mean, for being the catalyst that actually made this happen.
Well, let me thank you two. You're the two that did all the work and gave us a very informative and I must say very entertaining presentation. Well, a little different than the usual SCA stuff, and that's good because variety is the spice of life here. Now, just before we go, well, actually, first of all, Marshall and Kris, that's great, a great request if anybody has something to share with you, but how can they get in touch with you? Maybe you can just give an email address or something like that?
Yeah, if people want to write down, my email address is basically my name, KRIS J as in Joseph, KRAUSESQ, Edward Sam at Yahoo. I'm very easy to find on the internet. There's not too many Kris J. Krauses. Marshall is a hip historian, I think, at Gmail.
That's
And
yeah, exactly. Hello, hiphistorian@gmail.com.
and
So,
he's
oh,
easy to
actually, oh, I'm
find as
sorry.
well.
I've got my own website. So it's actually hello@hiphistorian.com. No Gmail needed.
Oh, okay.
Both
Well,
of us are pretty easy to find because we have unique names.
Yeah,
right.
and I just threw up the Facebook group that I've been posting some of the stuff I've been finding in, as well as Instagram. So,
Great. And if anybody doesn't succeed with all that contact info, then just send it through to the SCA. Put president at sca-roadside.com or .org, I should say, and we'll be happy to forward it. So I just want to remind everybody about next month, when on Wednesday, September the 4th, at our usual time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, we will join Amy Webb of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, who will present a talk entitled Preserve Route 66, preparing for the centennial anniversary of America's most famous road. And SCA members will be receiving, actually already have received, the relevant details and registration link by email, and others can easily register through the SCA's website directly. So I'd like to thank everybody that took the time out of their evening to join us and watch this fascinating presentation tonight. If you're not a member of the SCA, you will receive an email either tonight or tomorrow morning inviting you to join and enjoy all the benefits of membership if you enjoyed this presentation. And also keep in mind that the recording will be available on the website probably tomorrow. Now, any last little thing that you'd like to say, Marshall or Kris?
All I'm going to say is that, this topic came up from an intellectual curiosity I had that started when I was a little kid, going to swap meets and stuff with my grandma, just buying strange and unusual records and being interested in different cultures and in different ways of life.
Yes.
I'm a straight male, but when I found these records, they were fascinating to me. And I just like to encourage people to, get outside your comfort zone sometimes and look into other ways of life and other cultures. And, Taylor Swift is not all that's out there. There's a whole world of fascinating things. And you can find them where you least expect them.
Well, that's very good advice, Kris, and thank you for giving that to us. Marshall, anything last words for the group?
For me, I always look for those intersections. And so that's why when Kris was like, well, what about this? And I was like, somebody else who actually knows something other than just me that I knew. And then when you all reached out and said, hey, do a program. And I was like, well, we can do some Arizona neon signs. We could do something like that. Or what about something completely different? And thank you all so much for being, yes, let's try something out of our norm.
Right. Well, and thank you. It's a real team effort here, no question. And we'll look forward to maybe hearing from you again sometime, Marshall, on something, another aspect of Arizona history.
Sounds
So
good.
I'm going to stop the recording and